Speech balloon. I never meant for it to happen. She was just my friend's mom, graceful, untouchable. But that night, when the house fell silent and her eyes lingered on mine a little too long, I realized some lines aren't crossed with words, but with a single breath, a single step closer. It started like any other evening. I wasn't expecting anything different, and maybe that's why it caught me off guard. My friend had invited me over, just to hang out like we always did, and I thought that's all it would be. But when I stepped into the house, it wasn't him who greeted me at the door. It was her. His mom. She smiled in that calm, effortless way of hers, a smile that never felt forced, never too much, just enough to make you feel seen. There was something grounding about her presence, like she carried the whole room without trying. She asked if I wanted something to drink, and the way she said it, warm, light, almost like she'd been waiting for me, stayed with me longer than it should have. The house was quiet except for the hum of the kitchen lights. I sat on the couch while she moved around, setting down glasses, the faint clink of ice breaking the silence. I couldn't help but notice the little things, how the sleeves of her sweater slid slightly up her arms when she reached for the shelf, how a loose strand of hair fell across her cheek and she brushed it back without a second thought. She wasn't trying to be anything other than herself, and somehow that made her even harder to look away from. When she finally joined me, she didn't just hand me the glass, she placed it gently in front of me, her fingers brushing the table as if she wanted to make sure it was steady before letting go. She asked how I'd been, her voice low, even, carrying that kind of genuine interest people rarely give anymore. I told her about work, about classes, about little things that didn't really matter. But she listened as if every word was worth keeping. I caught myself watching her too closely, noticing the faint lines around her eyes, not as flaws but as stories. The kind of details that told me she'd lived, she'd loved, she'd carried more than most people ever knew. There was a grace in the way she leaned back, her fingers curling lightly around her glass, the soft light from the lamp catching the curve of her smile. I kept reminding myself she was my friend's mom, nothing more, nothing less. That should have been enough to draw the line. And yet, even in the simplest things, her laugh when I said something half funny, the way her gaze lingered just long enough to make me wonder if she noticed me too, something unspoken hung in the air. It wasn't loud, it wasn't dramatic. It was quiet. Subtle. Like the first ripple across still water. The kind of moment you almost convince yourself you imagined, until it keeps echoing long after. That night began like any other. But even then, I think some part of me knew it wouldn't stay that way. I thought the evening would unfold like it always did, my friend, the usual noise, the background chatter of the TV. But halfway through, he got a call. Something urgent came up, and before I knew it, he was rushing out the door with a quick apology, saying he'd be back soon. And just like that, it was only the two of us. The living room felt different once he was gone. The kind of quiet that doesn't press, but lingers, heavy enough to notice. The faint ticking of the wall clock became louder, almost deliberate, like it was reminding me of every second passing. She stayed where she was, across the sofa, her glass balanced loosely in her hand. For a moment, I didn't know what to say. I told myself to act normal, to just wait it out until my friend came back. But when she looked at me, really looked at me, it wasn't the same casual glance she usually gave. Her smile was softer now, her laughter quieter. It wasn't the laughter you share with a room full of people. It was the kind you save when there are only two of you left, when everything feels just a little more private. The lamplight cast a glow across her features, highlighting the curve of her cheek, the faint shine in her eyes. She leaned back against the couch cushions, relaxed, but there was an awareness there too. I felt it. I felt it in the way her gaze lingered 1 second longer than it needed to, in the way her fingers traced the rim of her glass absent-mindedly, like she was distracting herself from a thought she didn't want to say out loud. I shifted slightly in my seat, suddenly too aware of how close we were. Not close enough to touch, not yet, but close enough to feel the possibility of it. Close enough for the air between us to feel charged, like something invisible was pressing in. We talked, but the words were lighter than what hung underneath them. I asked if she minded the sudden quiet, and she laughed softly, shaking her head. "Sometimes it's nice," she said. "Sometimes silence is easier than noise." The way she said it made my chest tighten, though I couldn't explain why. I found myself studying the little things, the way her hand rested gently on her knee, the subtle rise and fall of her shoulders as she breathed, the faint scent of her perfume drifting toward me every time she shifted. It was all so ordinary, so simple, and yet it pulled at me in a way I didn't expect. I wanted to look away, to break the spell, but I couldn't. Not when her eyes met mine again and held. Not when, for a brief second, it felt like either of us wanted to be anywhere else. The room wasn't empty. Not anymore. It was full, of quiet, of possibility, of something waiting just beyond words. The quiet had settled between us, but it wasn't uncomfortable anymore. It was the kind of quiet that waits, the kind that invites honesty. She took a slow sip from her glass, set it down carefully on the table, and when she looked back at me, something in her expression had shifted. Her eyes weren't just watching me. They were searching. We started talking again, but it wasn't about small things this time. Not about work, or classes, or errands. She asked me questions no one ever bothered to ask. Do you ever feel like you're rushing through life? Do you ever worry you'll look back and realize you missed the good parts? Her voice carried a softness, but underneath it there was weight. The kind of weight people only share when they feel safe. I told her what I could, that yes, sometimes it feels like I'm moving too fast, like I don't even know where I'm headed. She nodded gently, as if she understood more than she let on. Then she hesitated. Her fingers traced the rim of her glass again, but slower this time, like she was stalling before she spoke. Finally, she said, almost in a whisper, "It's strange. People look at me, and all they see is a mom. Someone older. Someone who's supposed to have everything figured out." She gave a short laugh, but it wasn't from amusement. It was the kind of laugh people use when they're covering something deeper. They don't see me anymore. Not really. Not the way I used to be seen. Her words hung in the air. For a moment, I didn't know how to respond. I could feel how much it cost her to say them, how rare it must be for her to let someone glimpse that part of herself. So I didn't try to fix it. I just listened. Really listened. And when our eyes met again, I let her see that I wasn't looking past her, or around her, or through her. I was looking at her. Something softened in her expression then, like she hadn't expected me to understand, but part of her wanted to believe I did. She reached for her glass again, and as she set it back down, her hand brushed against my forearm. It was brief, almost accidental, but the warmth of her touch lingered like it had a purpose. My breath caught, but I didn't pull away. Neither did she. Her voice lowered, steadier now. "It's just nice being heard. You notice things other people don't." The words landed deeper than I expected. And in that moment I realized, this wasn't about filling silence anymore. This was about her letting me in, little by little, into the parts of herself she didn't show the world. It was subtle, fragile, like glass in my hands. But it was real. And it was more powerful than anything else she could have given me. The quiet had settled between us, but it wasn't uncomfortable anymore. It was the kind of quiet that waits, the kind that invites honesty. She took a slow sip from her glass, set it down carefully on the table, and when she looked back at me, something in her expression had shifted. Her eyes weren't just watching me. They were searching. We started talking again, but it wasn't about small things this time. Not about work, or classes, or errands. She asked me questions no one ever bothered to ask. Do you ever feel like you're rushing through life? Do you ever worry you'll look back and realize you missed the good parts? Her voice carried a softness, but underneath it there was weight. The kind of weight people only share when they feel safe. I told her what I could, that yes, sometimes it feels like I'm moving too fast, like I don't even know where I'm headed. She nodded gently, as if she understood more than she let on. Then she hesitated. Her fingers traced the rim of her glass again, but slower this time, like she was stalling before she spoke. Finally, she said, almost in a whisper, "It's strange. People look at me, and all they see is a mom. Someone older. Someone who's supposed to have everything figured out." She gave a short laugh, but it wasn't from amusement. It was the kind of laugh people use when they're covering something deeper. "They don't see me anymore. Not really. Not the way I used to be seen." Her words hung in the air. For a moment, I didn't know how to respond. I could feel how much it cost her to say them, how rare it must be for her to let someone glimpse that part of herself. So I didn't try to fix it. I just listened. Really listened. And when our eyes met again, I let her see that I wasn't looking past her, or around her, or through her. I was looking at her. Something softened in her expression then, like she hadn't expected me to understand, but part of her wanted to believe I did. She reached for her glass again, and as she set it back down, her hand brushed against my forearm. It was brief, almost accidental, but the warmth of her touch lingered like it had a purpose. My breath caught, but I didn't pull away. Neither did she. Her voice lowered, steadier now. "It's just nice being heard. You notice things other people don't." The words landed deeper than I expected. And in that moment I realized, this wasn't about filling silence anymore. This was about her letting me in, little by little, into the parts of herself she didn't show the world. It was subtle, fragile, like glass in my hands. But it was real. And it was more powerful than anything else she could have given me. After her words, the room felt different. Not because anything dramatic had happened, but because something unspoken had settled between us. I could feel it in the way her eyes lingered, in the way she leaned just slightly toward me, as if drawn closer without realizing it. The conversation faded, but it wasn't empty. The silence carried everything we didn't dare say out loud. She shifted a little on the sofa, angling herself toward me. It was a small movement, but I felt it instantly, the narrowing of space, the soft brush of her knee almost grazing mine. My pulse quickened, though I tried to keep my breathing steady. The lamp cast a warm glow across the living room, catching the edges of her hair, making it shimmer in places where it fell loosely over her shoulder. She tucked one strand behind her ear, and I noticed the faint tremble of her fingers. Maybe it was nothing. Or maybe it was the same nervous current I was fighting inside my chest. I wanted to say something, anything to cut the tension. But every word that came to mind felt clumsy, unworthy of the moment. So I stayed quiet, letting the silence grow thicker. And in that silence I heard everything, the soft rhythm of her breathing, the ticking clock that suddenly seemed too loud, the faint creak of the cushion as she leaned just a little closer. Her perfume lingered in the air, faint, subtle, something floral that carried warmth instead of sharpness. Every time she shifted, it reached me, wrapping itself around my senses until it felt like she was everywhere, not just beside me. She turned her head slightly, and when our eyes met, I couldn't look away. It wasn't a glance anymore. It was steady, intentional, holding me in place like a thread stretched tight. There was no smile, no mask, just her, open and unguarded, as though daring me to see her fully. I swallowed hard, my hand resting against my thigh, fingers twitching with the urge to move, to reach for her, to close that final inch of distance. But I didn't. Not yet. Something told me that if this was going to happen, it couldn't be rushed. It had to come in its own time, on its own fragile terms. Her hand moved again, this time brushing against the edge of the cushion between us. Closer now. So close that if either of us shifted just a little, we'd touch. The air thickened. My chest felt tight, not from fear, but from the weight of holding myself back. Every part of me was aware of her nearness, her stillness, her unspoken invitation. And yet, we both stayed there, caught in that delicate balance. Not leaning in, not pulling away. Just suspended in a moment that felt like it could break, or change everything, with the slightest movement. It wasn't a kiss. It wasn't a confession. It was something quieter, something deeper. The kind of stillness that carries more truth than words ever could. The silence between us wasn't empty anymore. It pulsed, like the beat of a hidden rhythm only we could hear. My heart was steady but loud, and I wondered if she could sense it, feel the weight of it in the air. She was the first to break it, not with words, not at first, but with the faintest shift in her body. She leaned just a little closer, her arm resting on the cushion between us, her fingertips brushing against the fabric. It was such a small movement, but it closed the distance in a way that made everything sharper. Her voice came softer than before, almost as if she was afraid of the sound carrying too far. "You know," she began, pausing as though the rest of the sentence might betray more than she intended. Her eyes dropped for a second, then lifted to mine again. "You listen differently than most people. Like what I say matters." The words landed in me like a spark. It wasn't just what she said, it was the way she said it, a mixture of wonder and disbelief, as if she couldn't remember the last time she'd felt noticed. I didn't trust myself to speak. I was afraid anything I said would break the fragile spell. So instead, I let my expression answer, let her see in my eyes that she wasn't imagining it. That I saw her, not just as someone's mother, not just as someone older, but as herself. Her hand moved then, slowly, like she was testing the air between us. It rested lightly against my knee, barely a touch at first, so soft I almost questioned if it was intentional. But she didn't pull back. She stayed there, her fingertips grazing fabric, warm and steady. The contact sent a quiet rush through me, not overwhelming, but undeniable. My breath itched, and I forced myself not to move too quickly. I wanted to reach for her hand, to hold it, but I stayed still, letting her decide how far this moment could go. Her eyes locked with mine, long and searching. There was no smile, no nervous laugh this time. Just honesty, raw and exposed, as though she was asking a question without speaking it. The clock ticked louder in the background. My chest rose and fell, and in that rhythm, I could feel her breathing too, just slightly quicker than before. It wasn't just me caught in this, it was her too. Her thumb brushed lightly against my knee, the smallest of movements, but it carried more weight than anything either of us had said all night. A touch that wasn't accidental. A touch that meant something. I didn't move away. I didn't need to. The truth was already there, allied between us, woven into the air we were both trying so hard not to break. For the first time that night, I wasn't just aware of her presence. I was aware of her choice, and how it was leading us, inch by inch, into something neither of us had planned, but both of us suddenly couldn't deny. Her hand still rested lightly on my knee, but the silence between us had changed again. It wasn't waiting anymore. It was moving. A current we were both caught in, whether we admitted it or not. She shifted slightly, setting her glass aside on the table with careful precision, as though giving herself permission to free her hands from any distraction. For a moment she sat still, breathing, her eyes flicking between mine and the empty space around us, as if searching for a reason to hold back. But then, she didn't. Slowly, she leaned forward, her hand brushing along the back of the couch as she steadied herself. I felt the faint press of her knee against mine, the warmth spreading like fire through fabric. My breath locked in my chest as her other hand touched my shoulder, gentle, cautious, not pulling, just anchoring herself. And then, with a movement so deliberate it felt like the room itself held its breath, she eased herself onto my lap. The weight of her was soft but undeniable, grounding me in a way that sent a rush of heat through my chest. The fabric of her dress brushed against my arm, smooth and light, carrying her warmth with it. She settled slowly, carefully, as though giving me a chance to stop her, to say no. But I didn't. I couldn't. My arms moved instinctively, circling her waist, not tightly, just enough to hold her, to steady her. My palms rested against the curve of her back, feeling the quiet rise and fall of her breath. She was close now, so close that her hair brushed against my cheek, carrying the faintest trace of her perfume. Either of us spoke. Words would have been too heavy, too clumsy for what was unfolding. Instead, we just stayed there, suspended in a fragile kind of stillness. Her hands rested on my shoulders, fingers curling lightly against the fabric of my shirt, as if testing whether I would hold her there. Her heartbeat was unsteady. I could feel it through her, quick and restless, echoing my own. She leaned forward slightly, her forehead almost brushing mine, her breath warm against my skin. It wasn't reckless. It wasn't rushed. It was quiet, careful, and impossibly tender. The kind of moment where everything slows down, where the simplest touch carries more meaning than anything else in the world. I wanted to memorize it, the weight of her against me, the warmth of her hands, the way she held herself not as someone untouchable, but as someone who wanted to be held. For the first time all night, I didn't feel the need to question what this was, or why it was happening. It didn't matter. All that mattered was that she was here, close enough for me to feel every breath, every heartbeat, every silent truth we had been circling around. And in that fragile stillness I knew we had already crossed the line. Her weight against me was both steady and fragile, as though she wasn't sure if she belonged there but didn't want to move away either. I held her gently, my arms around her waist, not pulling, not pushing, just being a place where she could rest if she chose. For a while neither of us spoke. It was only her breath, soft and uneven, brushing against my cheek, and the quiet thud of my own heartbeat echoing in my ears. I thought maybe she would pull back, laugh it off, pretend it hadn't happened. But she didn't. She stayed. Then, slowly, she leaned her forehead against mine. The contact was simple, barely there, yet it carried more weight than anything else that had happened that night. Her hands tightened slightly on my shoulders, like she needed to hold on to something solid. "I don't know what happens after this," she whispered, her voice so soft I almost missed it. "But for the first time in a long time, I feel alive again." Her words sank deep into me. They weren't rehearsed, they weren't planned, they were raw. Vulnerable. And I realized then that this wasn't about desire, not really. It was about something she hadn't allowed herself to feel in years, to be wanted, to be seen, to be cared for. I lifted my hand, brushing my thumb lightly over hers where it rested against my shoulder. The smallest touch, but enough to let her know I heard her. That I understood. "I don't need to know what happens after this," I said quietly. "Right now is enough." She closed her eyes, and for a moment, it felt like the weight she carried slipped away. The lines of worry in her face softened, replaced by something gentler, something freer. We stayed like that, not rushing, not forcing the moment to be bigger than it was. Her cheek rested against mine, warm and steady. My hand traced slow circles along her back, not to move her closer, but to let her know I was here, fully present. It wasn't passion that defined that moment. It was peace. A rare, unshakable kind of peace that comes only when two people stop pretending, when they let go of what they should be, and simply allow themselves to be. Eventually, she pulled back just enough to look at me. Her eyes shimmered in the lamplight, and though she didn't smile, the softness there said everything. Gratitude. Relief. A quiet kind of joy. We didn't need to say more. The silence between us wasn't heavy anymore. It was warm, filled with something unspoken but undeniable. That night didn't end with promises or plans. It ended with something simpler, the quiet closeness of two hearts finding each other when they least expected it. And though I didn't know what tomorrow would bring, I knew one thing for certain: nothing would ever feel ordinary again.